Welcome to A Drop of Silence, the groundbreaking podcast series that dives deep into the realms of controversy. Join us as we bring special guests who share their extraordinary experiences and offer unparalleled insight into history, today's news headlines, and the future. Get ready to embark on a thought-provoking journey where silence speaks volumes and the truth lies somewhere beneath the surface.
What time will it be when war is no more? When bullets are melted and the warships moor.
Shalom. My guest this week is the fabulous Rick Sykes. I have known Rick Sykes now for well over 40 years, which is a really scary thought. And during that time, Rick has been the producer of NBC local news, and he has taught media and how newscasters should behave, how stories should be presented to the public, and how much research a person needs to go into before even considering telling a story to the public. So much so that he has won awards up the wazoo about his skills at teaching this. And his students love him so much. They even claimed him to be the Professor of the Year, and he won it. He is considered one of the top professors of media in the entire United States. And I'm so glad that he's here to talk about it. He just talks leagues above me, so I just let him go on. So I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did having it. Welcome to A Drop of Silence, a controversial podcast series where our special guests share their unique experiences, insights regarding world history, the news headlines of today and the future. And with me today is Rick Sykes, a friend that I've known for over 40 years. Oh my God, can you believe that?
That's a long
Rick Sykes is a Professor Emeritus at Central Michigan University. His teaching career spanned 24 years at CMU, where he was responsible for overseeing a student-run television news operation, which produced a live nightly newscast 5 nights a week. Mr. Sykes was also inducted into the Michigan Broadcasting Hall of Fame in the fall of 2020. The news operation secured a 17-year string of Television Station of the Year awards from the Michigan Association of Broadcasters Foundation. And prior to joining the faculty at the university, Rick spent a total of 23 years in the communications field, including 17 years in broadcast news. He also presented research on media topics at conferences in Iceland and Oxford. And my favorite part of Rick is that he was voted Professor of the Year in North America 2 years in a row, which is no small feat when you're talking about university students.
Right.
So what I want to talk to you about, Rick, because you are so smart about and knowledgeable about teaching media and newscast reports and everything. In my mind, I'm watching CNN and Fox and all of those stations, and I'm going, none of you are telling the truth. I find myself going back to the computer in researching all of the topics that they spoke about, because they all had a slant to them. They weren't telling the truth. They seemed to me to tell what they want you to know, not what's actually happening. Am I wrong in this assumption?
Well, before we start talking that, I need to make one adjustment that you only get to be named once. Station of the Year. I mean, Professor of the Year.
But they wanted you to be
Yeah.
twice.
To your question, I think what you are seeing is the second part of your statement, that they have their slant on the topic. The whole issue of the truth is one of the dynamics we're facing now. Increasingly, the issue that media organizations and both traditional media organizations and online media organizations are bumping heads over is what is the truth. The Trump administration officials famously made the line alternative truths, alternative realities, as one of the statements that they would throw out periodically when they disagreed with a statement that a traditional media organization would make. And it has become more of a central conversation piece. Truth, facts that are independently verifiable are the hallmark of traditional media going back 20, 30, 40 years. In order for you to be a journalist, an effective journalist, or considered effective journalist, in the early years of media in the 70s and early 80s, was that you adhered to an independently verifiable set of facts. And there might be a conservative or a liberal bent to those facts. In other words, I may come at it from a conservative perspective, but the central set of facts would be the same. That is what's changed. Now you're battling situations where you'll have, particularly online organizations or organizations from websites and stuff, create a whole different set of realities and present those as their facts. And so when you have that, there's no central set of agreed upon elements to a story. I think it's this, and I'm going to give you my set of reasonings for this. And they may not be based in fact at all. They may be just based on what I think. And when you're trying to figure out what is the essence of a story, what is the truth of a story, the challenge for you is tremendous, because you've got so many avenues of information coming at you. And if you really want to know the truth, you've got to spend a lot of time doing what you're talking about. You got to spend time looking at websites that are considered to be historically, and also websites that you can independently verify that the information they're giving you is in fact based on truth, on facts. Because there are a lot of websites that are creating their own reality. And if you are inclined to buy into that reality, then those websites are the ones you look at, because they reinforce those beliefs that you already have. So you really have to work at it to try to find out what the independently verifiable set of truths are. And they tend to be somewhere in between the far right and the far left. But you got to work at it. Otherwise, you get caught up in that sort of self-imposed reality that's reinforced by these different websites and stuff that spout their beliefs as fact, when in fact they're not.
Yeah. I always remember that picture by Reuters of the bombing of Beirut. And there in fact was only one big billowing of flame and smoke, but Reuters wanted to show that it looked worse than it was. So they added 2 billowing flames and smokes so that it looked like all of Beirut was destroyed. And it wasn't until several days later, and then I think it was Jake Tapper who said, this is in fact wrong. This was a lie. This was a bald-faced lie, and we all fell for it. And I'm thinking, how does that kind of thing happen?
Yeah. In fact, news organizations are really setting up whole special units to try to give them the opportunity to verify photos and images to make sure what they're showing is real and not fake or manufactured, because that's the other area that we're all faced with now. And it's really a sophisticated environment where photos and videos are doctored, and what you're seeing is not reality, but a manufactured view of the organization. I mean, of the activity, of what's happening. So you really have to spend a lot of time understanding what are the processes you can use to help you determine whether or not what you're watching is in fact real or not. And news organizations are going through the same process. If you watch the current conversations about what's going on from a military standpoint, oftentimes if there's a conflict and it's being covered by a news organization, and they're showing video of an attack area or whatever, the first thing they'll say is, this is unverified, if they have not independently verified it. And then if it's a photo or whatever, they're using sophisticated geotagging to show that, to look at that photo and match it up with the area using pictures, aerial photographs, to see if in fact where it took place matches up with the aerial photos of that area. So it's not been doctored as a way of trying to ensure that the video you're seeing is in fact legitimate. But you've got to be on guard. You got to be on guard.
Yeah. One of the things Jorn Ettinger from Israel talks about, that Europe and the Middle East are famous for changing the numbers. And he said, like, with the example he gives is how many Palestinians actually live in Judea and Samaria. He said the UN will tell you that number is 2.6. He said the Jordanians will tell you it's in essence 1.3. But they've doctored it at the UN to make it more amenable to what they want to have said. And I see it happening all the time. There was one picture coming from Israel where I happened to be there that day, and that's the only reason why I'm saying it's from Israel. It was an Israeli soldier, and he was dragging this little kid who was about 8, who had been pitching Molotov cocktails at the Israeli army. And he said, "That's it, you're in trouble. I'm going to take you to your dad now." Because he'd already taken the kid home to the mother 3 times, and the kid didn't do it, wouldn't believe that he was going to be in trouble. But as soon as he said his dad, the kid knew he was going to get beaten, and he peed his pants. But everybody said that kid was being terrorized by the cops, and that isn't what it was. It was, he's been told, you're going to be taken home to your dad. So, I mean, it's such a invasive thing. Like, I don't know, is there anybody on the air that you would actually believe?
Well,
outside of your astounding students?
The way I approach on-air news coverage is that I look at a variety of sources. I look at on the cable side, I look at CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. on how they approach the story of the day, whatever that particular story. Like right now, one of the big stories on is Trump's in court today because of a civil trial over his being accused of distorting the value of his properties. So if you look at the coverage of that from those three main channels, cable channels, you will see variations of what took place today. The opening photos, they all had that.
Mm-hmm.
The comments as they relate to what's taking place today, they all had that. But the emphasis changed depending on which station you were watching. The Fox News station tended to spend more time showing comments by Trump, who called it a sham and had derogative comments about the judge in the case and also the state who was bringing the charges. CNN and MSNBC spent more time talking about what the charges were and that it was unprecedented and what was going to happen over the course of the next several weeks. So depending on your view about whether or not you believe Trump or not, then your perception of fairness of the discussion about what was taking place would vary. If you believe Trump and felt that he was being persecuted as he was suggesting, then the focus on Fox News about his comments resonated with you, and you were less likely to believe or trust the comments that were being made by CNN and MSNBC. If, however, you felt that the state's efforts to bring Trump to justice and hold him accountable for the false statements he was making about the value of his properties, then you tended to spend more time listening to CNN's commentary or MSNBC's commentary because they were focusing more on the case that was being made against Trump. So in order for you to get an overall sense of proportionately what was happening, you needed to pay attention to each side because there were some points that each side had to do that. But how many people have time to do that?
Yeah, exactly.
To sit there and listen to all of those comments over those three channels. And there are others too. There's Newsmax, which is very much a conservative channel. And I saw a little of their coverage. And they really were leaning heavily into the accusations being raised by the former president and less on the case being developed by the government against Trump. So in that case, if you're watching them and you're trying to find the essence of that story, you really have to start listening to the red flags going off because you're saying, wait a minute, this is all they're talking about. They're not providing any sense of why the government is bringing this case. Then you know you're in a fringe area, you're in a really focused point of view, and you have to decide if that's important to you, if that's reaffirming enough that you don't want to hear anything else. Once you cross that line, and it doesn't matter whether it's this conservative line or the liberal line, where I don't want to hear anything else, this confirms what I believe, you're stuck.
Yeah.
You are caught in an increasingly challenge of polarized conversation. It's polarized in the United States, and it's not just in the United States.
No.
You see it across the world where you have media organizations or in more authoritative organizations where you're just getting one side and you really have to hunt to try to get other information.
It's interesting over here in Canada. I don't know if you can get them. There's a China Global News There's Al Jazeera. There's an Iranian news. There is Punjab news. And if you listen to all of them, they're all as different could be. And their focus is on how it affects their country, which I find really fascinating, because I don't think you're getting those people are getting the facts. They're getting what that government wants you to feel as part of their threat, especially China. China just called, I just couldn't believe it. He was talking about Trump. They just think he's the laughing stock of the world, and they can't believe the United States even had him as president. And I'm like, okay, but you're even though they're saying that, and I might agree with them, but they're not giving any reasons why. They're not showing examples of what he's done to make him be that way. It's kind of scary. Like, who do you believe? You know, like some Joe Blow guy coming home from work. Who do you watch?
Yep, I've seen some of Al Jazeera US, when they were they had their English version that was carried in the United States. In fact, I had a friend of mine, one of his colleagues worked for Al Jazeera in the US. She was based out of Detroit. And one of the things I noticed about Al Jazeera, they were different from some of the state-run news organizations. They took more of a Western approach to how they presented news. And their coverage, when it was outside of particular areas in the Middle East, was pretty good.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say.
And I remember bringing in some of their coverage for one of my news organization classes. And they were pointing out, this was during the Iraq War, some of the mistakes that the U.S. government was making, and their coverage was really good and really pointed out some issues that later were exposed by some of the U.S. media. But they were the first ones that were talking about it. And so I was impressed with their coverage. The only time you ran into issues is when they were covering issues in their backyard.
Yeah.
Then there was a little more of a particular slant to it. But when they got away from that, they had some pretty good coverage in terms of journalistic, strong, focused coverage. But it is a challenge. It is a challenge.
I remember when you were teaching at the Windsor International Writers Conference, you had us write a paragraph about a piece of news, and it had to be 50 words, and all of us made the same mistake because we were pro the person, or we were either pro or we were against the person, and all of us used the word the. And you stopped us all and said, no, it has to be at, because you're making a statement as to whether that person's guilty or not.
Right.
And I just went, and I'm listening now and I'm going, oh, where's Rick Sykes? You so need to be in there telling them that they're doing it wrong.
Yeah, you find the challenge. You find it in local news at times, and you find it. The cable news tends to be the area that you see a lot of the bigger mistakes, or the bigger kind of assumptions about statements that are being made. Wait a minute, how do you know that that's true? Where's that coming from? And they don't take the time to say this is unverified, or they're saying it as a fact, when in fact it's still an allegation. It hasn't been proven yet. It's an allegation. And sometimes they'll correct themselves and said allegedly, but other times they'll just run through the statement as though it's a fact. And it's not. And you have to be vigilant about that if in fact your desire is to find out the essence of the story to make your decision. And the essence of the story to make your decision has never been more important, because there's so much polarization, so much is me against you.
Yeah.
And I don't want to hear you because you're wrong. I don't want to listen to what you have to say because I don't believe it anyway.
Yeah.
My sources, my what I go to get information is the right place to go. I even and it was just so disheartening. Knew a former local journalist. He wasn't a national, he was a local journalist. Been in the business for over 25 years, retired. And something about during that retirement period, he started to take on a framework about coverage, about stories. And when you talk to him, you realize that he had abandoned that journalistic approach to looking for multiple verifications of what he was wanted to say, and just focused on one particular set of sources. And when you would say, well, what about this point of view? Well, no, that can't be right because my sources tell me that that's not right. And you go, wait a minute, you spent your career looking to verify the information before you put it out. And now you're sitting there telling me that you don't care about these other sources because you know that what you're looking at is the only one that's telling the truth. That doesn't ring true.
Yeah. No, it doesn't.
You know?
I have one question, and I've been thinking about it for a long time. Do you think that the news became more biased and more prejudiced and as awful as it is now when all of these stations went 24/7? So they were so desperate to cover that 24 hours that they just accepted a lot of things and didn't do the research.
Well, I would take it a little different way. There are a couple of dynamics that have surfaced that have contributed to what we're facing now. One was a philosophical change. News used to be considered a public service.
Right.
Stations did news as a public service for their audience. They made their money from programming, advertising, showing, supporting their program. Then they realized that they could make really good money with their news program. And so the idea of focusing on ratings and increasing the audience for their news programming, which allowed them to charge more for advertising, became a big focal point. And stations, all the network stations that were bought out, CBS, ABC, NBC, were all bought by conglomerates, which once they were bought, they were at that point became profit centers. The corporate executives looked at the news divisions as profit centers. And so the news divisions moved from a public service standpoint to a profit center standpoint, where they had to make their budgets. And their budgets became smaller. The number of people involved in generating the news became fewer, and the demands to make profit became bigger. So you had that whole issue of you're going to have to do more with less because you need to turn a profit. So you had the dynamic coming into play, which then made it much more of an aggressive environment, being the first to do a story, and making sure it's right, but being first to do the story became the operative word. Then the emergence of social media became the other dynamic. And what social media did is it increases demands on news reporters, editors, because instead of having specific deadlines for when you had to get your reports in for the traditional newscast, now with social media, instantaneously you had to be ready to perform, to put that story out. And the accuracy of the information competed with the deadlines for getting it out. Story breaks. I want to see something on my website right away.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get a rumor, you try to check the rumor, but you got to get something up on that website. You got to get something on Twitter or X. You got to get it out right away. So maybe you report what you heard, which may not be the final word on that, but you're making a presence on that social media link. And so now you've got that whole second line of informational flow. And I remember being at a conference once and having a news director explain it to me this way. He said, with social media, everybody's putting out information. Not all of it's going to be accurate, but they're putting it out there about, this is what I hear. I heard there was supposed to be 3 people shot or 2 people shot. So in order for you to be competitive, you need to have some presence on that social media realm. So the argument that I was given, which I had a hard time dealing with, was that I'm going to put out the information my reporters have generated and tried to verify as best they can. It may not be totally accurate, but they're trying to verify it as best they can. But we want to be a presence there. We want to see our audience members looking at that social media and seeing our reporters generating information, presenting some information. So if it's not right, that's the operative word, if it's not correct, we'll correct it later. So what they're saying is, I'm going to put it out there. If it's not fully correct, we'll correct it as we go along. Well, in that traditional sense, if it's not right, you don't put it out there until you can verify it, then you put it out there. But in a social media philosophical framework, some organizations, not everybody, but some organizations say, well, we'll correct it as we get new information. The idea is to get that information in the flow that we know at this point, at least that what we think is right, and then we correct it as we go. It's a different mindset.
Yeah. I remember in that television show, Sorkin's The Newsroom with Jeff Daniels.
Oh, right.
And it was when the Texas congresswoman was shot, and they were all the other stations were saying she was dead. And Jeff Daniels says, we don't have that. We cannot corroborate that. And it went right up to the board, and he stood his ground, and then it ended up she was alive. Right. And I thought, boy, if ever that doesn't ring home, that was an amazing scene. And that's just what you're talking about, Rick. And
right, it does. It is a challenge. It is a challenge, and you don't want to be the one to make that kind of mistake.
Yeah. But
I've seen a classic example when the Supreme Court they handed down a ruling. I'm trying to remember what it was in relation to. It was on Obamacare. Mm-hmm. Supreme Court issued a ruling on Obamacare, and the Chief Justice submitted the opinion. The first part of the opinion, if you just read the first part of the opinion, it gave you the impression that the Supreme Court had knocked down Obamacare. And some news organizations, at least 2 news organizations, said that because they didn't read the whole ruling. the whole ruling ended up that the Chief Justice was a swing vote that said it was that they were supporting Obamacare. And boy, did those organizations have egg on their face. And it happened because of the dynamics.
Yeah.
There should have been number one to get that information out there. And so they were scanning it. And when they went far enough down the ruling to see what they thought was a definitive statement, they went with it. And there was at least two organizations that did it. I'm not going to say who it was, but two organizations did it because I watched them say it because I was flipping back and forth. And the other organizations weren't saying it. And that was because their reporters or producers, I don't know which one had the opinion, was reading the whole opinion. And when they finished the whole opinion, they said, Chief Justice has support the majority and Obamacare has been affirmed. And then the other two organizations, when they realized the mistake they made, both because of the other stations and also they finished reading it, then they went on and did the correction. But that is
I know, it's scary.
Yes.
So is there a specific, I guess there is a specific time when you can say this is when it changed to the garbage that it is, kind of thing. That would be about the 70s, wouldn't it?
Well, no, it was an evolution. The evolution of changes, and there was different levels of changes. If you read stories about news, critiques of news, when you start looking at the 80s, you start seeing stories about the impact of ownership changes, and you start seeing complaints by traditional journalists about the new philosophy of covering news and the demands on reporters, increasing demands on reporters. And then with the emergence of social media, you saw again another change. The latest change, the newest issue, is the emergence of the impact of artificial intelligence on misinformation. The concern about manipulated images that with what they call deep fake videos and audio, that now you can put on an image of a famous person and have that person say anything you want them to say, and it looks real. And so the question now is, what do we do? How do we tag that video so that the audience knows that that's not that real person? I've actually seen at least one commercial where they've used deep fake in the commercial, and that's the newest arena. Between that and the print changes in print and using AI and how it can replicate a story, pulling information out of all of the articles it scans. That's the new arena.
Wow. So it's going to get even scarier, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You're going to be pushed even harder if you care about the truth of a story, to try to figure out how to determine what you're seeing is true, and that you have gathered the facts of the story. And the people you're listening to, first of all, are the real people, as opposed to a deep fake image or audio of a person. And the information you're getting is in fact true. Or if it's not, if it's a conjecture, that in fact you're being told that, or through your own sense of it. Wait a minute, I don't think that's true. I think that's an assumption that's being made, and I need to factor that in on how much weight I want to give to that.
Okay, I've got one last question before I let you go.
Oh, okay.
Who was your all-time favorite newscaster?
Oh man.
Yeah, going way back. Way back to that. Who was your all-time favorite newscaster? The one that you looked up to the most?
I'm not sure. I think it changed over time. I thought Dan Rather in his earlier years was somebody that I listened to, and then he sort of became a caricature of himself. Yeah.
What about old Walter Cronkite?
Walter
I heard
he was an anchor, but he wasn't somebody that I identified with. There weren't many blacks on the air when I was coming up that I could see as somebody that I could identify. Walter he was that person that came on at night, but I didn't identify with him. Didn't look like me, didn't sound like me. So he wasn't really one of my early on-air people. I would say, okay, I want to be like that person. Yeah, there weren't a lot of images that people that I followed strongly that I thought, oh yeah. Trying to think if there's somebody else.
George Clooney's dad was always a famous person, and I always forget his first name. But he sounded like an incredible journalist. He did more war stories.
Right.
Yeah. So that, which I think is a whole different ball game again, isn't it?
Yes. Now, Anna, oh, I always get her name wrong.
Amanpour, is that who you're trying to say?
Yes.
I think she's terrible.
Well, from a correspondence standpoint, I thought she was a pretty good correspondent in terms of being in war-torn places.
Yeah,
trying to do the news. There were other early women correspondents that I thought were pretty good. Yeah,
it's hard. It's really hard.
It is.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rick, for taking the time to come and talk to me. I hope you'll come back again.
Yes.
When news changes again, I'm going to have you back on and we'll dissect it again. Everybody, this is Rick Sykes. Thank you.
What time will it be when war is no more? When bullets are melted and the warships moor.
This podcast is brought to you by Unbreakable Bindings Publishing Company. Executive produced by Lori Baldassi, produced by Ryan Richardson, hosted by Pam Goldstein.